Good morning from Washington, D.C. I'm Amanda Walker. You're watching a special Sky News program, Donald Trump, the Disruptive President. In the last 2 hours, signs the president is changing course in the fight over his travel ban. He's just landed in Florida for a weekend of golf with the Japanese premier. But a brand new executive order is an option.
We'll win that battle, but we also have a lot of other options, including just filing a brand new order on Monday.
Won't immediately go to the Supreme Court, but promises to keep up the legal battle. We have a special report from Arizona on the Iraqi interpreters fighting the travel ban. And Donald Trump's latest handshake. This time, it's the firmest of grips for his latest guest. Now, believe it or not, we're only 21 days into Trump's presidency, and week 3 has been just as busy as the first 2. The president kicked off the week with this extraordinary claim about media coverage of terrorist attacks.
It's gotten to a point where it's not even being reported. And in many cases, the very, very dishonest press doesn't want to report it.
Now, the White House then rode back slightly, releasing a list of terror-related incidents it claimed were underreported. But the list included examples like the Bataclan attack in Paris, which, like many others on the memo, received blanket news coverage. Now, Betsy DeVos was appointed Education Secretary, but only just. The Republican donor with almost no experience in public education was confirmed by a historic tie-breaking vote from Vice President Mike Pence. And even more controversially, Jeff Sessions is the new Attorney General. The Trump loyalist has been criticized for his views on race and civil rights. And there have been fresh ethics concerns about Mr. Trump's presidency. On Wednesday, the president used Twitter to criticize the department store Nordstrom for dropping his daughter's clothing line. His senior advisor, Kellyanne Conway, added to the storm by urging people to go buy Ivanka's stuff. But the big story of the week has been the ongoing controversy over the travel ban. In the last few hours, the president appears to be reassessing his next steps and may even consider a new executive order altogether. Our correspondent Siobhan Robbins reports.
Please, look at me.
As only the second world leader to meet President Trump, the visit of Japan's Prime Minister is what the White House wanted people to be talking about.
Strong hands.
But Donald Trump's enthusiasm quickly dissolved as it became clear he couldn't keep the focus off his controversial travel ban.
Well, your question was unrelated to what we're here for today, but I'll answer it. We are going to keep our country safe, so we'll be doing something very rapidly having to do with additional security for our country. You'll be seeing that sometime next week. In addition, we will continue to go through the court process, and ultimately, I have no doubt that we'll win that particular case.
Earlier in the day, Shinzo Abe started his visit in the traditional way, paying his respects at the National Cemetery. And in front of the cameras, the two leaders looked at ease as they discussed trade and building a strong relationship. But online, the president labelled the appeal court's continued block on his travel ban disgraceful, while behind the scenes, White House staff were plotting their next move.
And here at the Supreme Court is where that fight could end up now the government's lost its appeal. 3 judges ruled they failed to prove the ban was needed to protect national security. But Donald Trump disagrees and is clearly working on new plans to limit who comes into the US.
On board Air Force One, the president revealed more details about what those plans could involve.
We'll win that battle, but we also have a lot of other options, including just filing a brand new order on Monday.
Are you planning to do that? Is that your plan?
Could very well be, but I'd like to keep you, I'd like to surprise you. We need speed for reasons of security, so it could very well be that we do that.
What are some of the changes that you're looking for? Very little.
The president's power isn't just being challenged in the courts. Anger erupted at town halls in Utah and Tennessee as crowds called on Republicans to hold him to account. For some, the ongoing legal battles have exposed the administration's weaknesses.
I think this is the first significant setback of the new administration. This is a businessman who's come into the White House and he's trying to run the country as if he ran business as a chief executive. And what he's come up against is the limits of his executive authority.
Arriving in Florida for a weekend of talks, President Trump is taking his first tentative steps onto the world stage. But 3 weeks in, and it's domestic issues which continue to dominate. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Washington.
As Donald Trump considers a new executive order, communities are on edge across the US, including Iraqis who worked alongside American troops. One of the biggest Iraqi communities is in Phoenix, Arizona. From there, our correspondent Greg Milam reports.
Arizona's so popular with Iraqis, they'll tell you, because the climate reminds them of home. But their presence here has put this hot, dry corner of America at odds with its president. There were protests at Phoenix Airport, as there were across the country, over Donald Trump's now suspended travel ban.
Say it loud, say it clear, refugees are welcome here!
And for Mohammed al-Tamimi, the targeting of Iraqis was especially hard to take. Like many here, he worked with US forces in the war in Iraq, and the ban feels like a betrayal.
This country was the start of my life. I love this country so much, I will give my soul to it. It makes me feel sad as an Iraqi, you know, no matter what, even if we live in this country, we always know that where we came from. A high percentage of American people think that Iraqis are terrorists now because they are in the immigration ban list. So some of the Iraqi people in our community are afraid, you know, to what will happen next.
In this airport warehouse, you see what Phoenix feels about refugees.
We are collecting goods from our community and other people that send us in donations. Some of them are used, lightly used and clean, and they come to us, and some of them are...
There's been a surge in support for a charity that furnishes their new lives here.
They are all the goods that we would...
The question I get asked is, why don't they like us? We're trying to assimilate, we're trying our best to be good Americans. We love America, we love Arizona, why are they doing this to us? It's a really hard question to answer.
Where are you from?
At the Iraqi American Society, you don't hear anger towards the president, just a hope he'll listen.
My name is Elias Shema. I want, please help for the people. You need coming here for America. أول شيء يعني أطلب من الرئيس.
Elias said he'd make his point better in Arabic. I want the president to hear my voice, he said, and change his mind and let my wife's family come here.
Elias was unusual in wanting to appear on camera because a lot of people here are very nervous. They fear retribution. Some, living here legally, even fear that in the current climate, they might face deportation.
Those that have made America home say the feeling of welcome is shifting. They can wipe away the graffiti, but the sense of being under threat remains. Greg Milam, Sky News, Phoenix.
Well, the first 3 weeks of Donald Trump's presidency have been marked by clashes with judges, foreign allies, and even department stores across America in places that helped secure his victory. There's a very different story.
This Sunday, a divided country. When a new president took the oath of office and hundreds of thousands of people gathered. The president's false claim that the media are consciously...
You might assume that America is outraged by Trump's presidency. But for millions of people across the country, like here in Jackson, Mississippi, that's not the case.
Pull the door too, Joni.
I've been in regular contact with Joni Horn throughout Trump's journey to the White House. She loved him in the Apprentice boardroom, but what does she make of him in the Oval Office? We hitched a ride on the school run.
A lot of people are terrified by the prospect of the next 4 years. How do you feel about them?
I'm excited. I mean, I'm very excited. I mean, give him a chance. You know, all he is trying to do is make it better.
Inauguration day, the next day, the Women's March, even more people. Did you understand why they were there?
No, I mean, I
Were you tempted to march, Joni?
No, not at all. I didn't even know what was going on, you know, but I mean, Trump did get a lot of fat women out there walking, so, you know, that's a good thing.
Well, these are people who care about America.
Well, then they shouldn't be so psychotic. I mean, he hasn't done anything, you know, he hasn't come out and said, I'm going to kill your firstborn child, you know, I'm going to destroy the earth. They haven't even given him a chance to do anything.
You know, he's a travel ban, for example, which
well,
a lot of
that's a
people
good thing. He's
say
trying
is
to do
unconstitutional
well, I
and
mean,
counterproductive.
He's trying to make us safe. He's trying to make us safe. And if you don't want to be safe, then pack your bags and go to another country. Okay. I love you.
Joni says she's happy and confident that she and her family will prosper under Trump.
Yeah, so let's put them some more, so we just ended up piling them all there.
PR executives Rick and Liza Lucer are traditional conservatives who couldn't bring themselves to vote Trump. But now he's president, they support him. They've even sensed growing confidence in business since he was elected.
What I see in Donald Trump is the fact that he has been in business his entire career. He knows how to run a business, so he understands what we're going through. And that's just the support.
But they're finding the pace of it all overwhelming.
We are sick and tired. We spent 18 months in an election that was extremely contentious. You know, and now in 3 weeks, it feels like another 18 months. And I think the American people have just lost the ability to give a damn. And so I think there is a very small segment that hang on every single word that's going on in Washington. But for the rest of America, which I would say is 90%, they're all kind of shrugging their shoulders going, hey, we had an election, elections have consequences, he won, let him do what he said he was going to do.
He's pretty much been the way he was in his campaign.
Yeah. Daniel Murray liked Trump from the start and gave him his vote, but not without reservations that haven't gone away.
What's been the highlight for you so far of Trump's presidency?
He's doing what he said he'd do.
Keeping promises?
Yeah. He said, I'm going to do these things, and that's what he's doing. And you got to admire that. Now, do I agree with everything, and do I agree with the pace and all that? Probably not. But you know what? He's doing what he said he'd do, and that's refreshing. Most politicians don't.
And worst moment so far?
I think just twittering and tweeting and doing all the other things that you just go, you know, take a breath, and you know, you got to be thick-skinned to be in that position. And I think that'll come around with time.
Trump's maverick presidency is gathering pace. The journey is taking America in a new direction. No one knows where it will end.
So there is obviously support out there, but it's far from universal. Here to discuss the new president's approval ratings is Ariel Edwards-Levy, polling director at the Huffington Post. So we heard, didn't we, during the election, the least popular candidate in modern times. Entering office, he was historically, again, low in popularity. How's he doing now?
It may not be surprising that after being an unpopular candidate, he's now an unpopular president. And obviously that didn't preclude him from becoming the president, but he started off with a much smaller sort of honeymoon period that most presidents have. And to the extent that he had that, it seems to be starting to fade already.
So what sort of figures are we looking at the moment? Because they do seem to vary quite a lot poll to poll.
They do quite a lot. And what you're seeing in our average is that he's at about a -5 favorability. You know, that people are 5 points likelier to disapprove of how he's doing than they are to approve. And at this point, Barack Obama was much, much higher. A majority of people still approved of him.
But that pattern of kind of diminishing from the initial ratings when they enter office, that's not unusual,
No,
is
it's
it?
not unusual at all. What's different here is that he's starting with a much smaller base of support. And what you're seeing is very similar to the campaign. It is completely polarized. His supporters, they think he's doing a great job. They love what he's done so far. Democrats, they hate him, and they hate him even more now. And the question is sort of that remaining slice who can be convinced. And right now, they're not looking especially convinced.
I'm going to quote Donald Trump here. Any negative polls are fake news. He doesn't like being unpopular, does he? It really gets to him.
No, and I mean, you know, every politician likes to ignore the numbers that don't look good for them. That might be a more sweeping way of doing it than most things. But look, he's going to point back to the election, say, they didn't say I was going to win and I won. National polls on average, they understated his margin in the popular vote by about 3 points. So if you take that, you look at the ratings now, you say, okay, well, let's give him the benefit of the doubt that he's being underestimated the same way. He's still underwater.
But when we were out in Mississippi in that report just there, when you speak to not even his most enthusiastic base, but the people who voted for him, the first thing they tell you is he's keeping his promises. So surely amongst his base, his approval rating must be pretty good. He's saying what he's doing what he said he was going to do.
Oh, it's almost universal among his base. Everything that he's done so far is looking great. It's what he promised them and it's what they're getting. And we'll see whether that continues as years go by. He starts owning the economy, the travel ban goes into effect or doesn't go into effect. But right now they're very happy because he's gone out there and, you know, he's being the president basically the way he campaigned. If they liked his campaign, they're going to like him as president.
I think we've got some footage now of Donald Trump's very long, vigorous handshake with Shinzo Abe. How do you think people are adapting to his style in office? Because it's totally unprecedented, isn't it? We haven't seen this kind of behaviour, the twittering, all of that. It's very, very new. Do you think people are struggling to just come to terms with that?
Yeah, and you know, I think one of the things that was very interesting in the campaign is that you asked people, is Donald Trump presidential? Does he have the right personality and temperament? And a lot of people said no and still voted for him. So maybe people are ready to give sort of a different kind of governing a chance. But at the same time, we will see whether that wears thin after a little while of his being in office.
Now, one poll that he did like recently, because he retweeted it, was the immigration order poll from Politico, saying that the majority of people are in favour of it, 55%. Is that being reflected in other polls? Is this outrage perhaps not as widespread as we think?
You know, I think we've seen a lot of polling on it, and it sort of has varied within a certain degree. What you're seeing in a lot of these is that it's anywhere from split to a majority disapproving to this one, which is sort of on the high edge of many of the polls that come out, a slight majority approving. And I think the people who fielded that poll would tell you that that's one of the best numbers for that poll. It also found his approval slipping in the same survey, which he did not happen to mention when he quoted this. But what you see is that there's sort of probably about 45 to 48%. It was a good idea, and that's been fairly consistent. And what's been different in different polls is how many people disapprove, and that's something where it's people who might not have had their minds made up are starting to think whether they like it or not. But it depends how you ask about these things, because if you say something like, you know, should the government be able to protect terrorists, everyone will think this is a great idea.
Right.
If you focus on sort of the chaos with the implementation and the idea that we should be trying to help people, translators who helped us out in the war, people will suddenly start having different thoughts.
Okay, but overall, he's got some work to do, hasn't he? Ariel Edwards-Levy from the Huffington Post. Thank you very much for joining us on this very chilly roof here in Washington, D.C. Join us for more on Donald Trump's eventful week after the break. Welcome back to our special program, The Disruptive President. In the past hour, Donald Trump has given an impromptu news conference on board Air Force One, revealing a little more about his plan to get his travel ban reinstated.
You also talk about the unfortunate part is it takes time statutorily, so it takes a little time. We'll win that battle. But we also have a lot of other options, including just filing a brand new order on Monday.
Are you planning to do that? Is that your plan?
Could very well be. But I'd like to keep you, I'd like to surprise you. We need speed for reasons of security, so it could very well be that we do that.
What are some of the changes that you're looking for?
Very little, just in honor of the decision. We will perhaps do that. We'll see, but on Monday or Tuesday.
You talked about new security measures. Is that separate from potentially writing a new...
We're going to have very, very strong vetting. I call it extreme vetting, and we're going to have very strong security in our country. We are going to have people come into our country that want to be here for good reasons.
This week, Donald Trump took one of America's favorite brands, and like so many of his battles, it all started on Twitter. He criticized the retailer Nordstrom for dropping his daughter Ivanka's clothing and accessories line. And while it's not the first time the president has tweeted about his displeasure with a corporation, ethics experts say he's straying into dangerous conflict of interest territory. Kellyanne Conway, Mr. Trump's senior advisor, was rebuked for making these comments on live television.
They're using her, who's been a champion for women empowerment,
Sure.
women in the workplace, to get to him.
Just,
so I think people can see through that.
30
go
seconds.
buy Ivanka's stuff is what I would tell you. I hate
there
shopping.
is
I'm going to go get some on myself today.
There is that.
It's a wonderful line. I own some of it. I'm going to just give it. I'm going to give a free commercial here. Go buy it today, everybody.
Now, joining me now is Matthew Miller, former chief spokesperson for the Department of Justice under President Obama. Lots to talk about here, Matthew. First of all, the travel ban. There's been all sorts of different lines coming out tonight about where this might go next. Donald Trump suggesting that they could have a new executive order, that they could still go to the courts. Is this a climb down? Is it reassessing? Are they realizing that this is going to be very tough to get through?
I think they're realizing they don't really have any good options right now to go forward in the courts. With the ruling they got from the Ninth Circuit, they can go to the Supreme Court, but with the Supreme Court tied right now, 4-4, 4 generally progressive judges, 4 conservative judges, the lower court ruling would stand if people vote as you would expect. So they don't have a good option at the Supreme Court. They don't have a good option staying in the Ninth Circuit. So his really best option is to actually withdraw that order, sign a new one. But of course, for him to do that, it's to admit defeat. And as we know, admitting defeat is not something he does very lightly, no.
So how could they change this? I mean, ultimately, there is a certain goal that we know they want to achieve. How can they change this to make it more acceptable in a legal sense?
The first thing they could do is exclude legal permanent residents or green card holders, which they tried to do. They tried to clarify after they issued the order that it didn't apply to green card holders, but in the language of the order it clearly does, and that's one thing the courts clearly came down strongly on them for, is including green card holders. There's some other tweaks they could make as well, but even then they're going to have real problems because the religious discrimination claim that the courts are looking at, you can't fix that with a new order. Donald Trump still said the things he did about giving preference to Christians. Rudy Giuliani still said the things he did about trying to do a Muslim ban, but do it in a legal way. And you can't undo that. So he'll be back in court even with a new, more narrowly drawn order, I believe.
But they say they're still going to fight for this order's constitutionality. Are they not reading the signals here that that might be very, very tough?
What they're saying in public and what they're thinking about private could be very different. I suspect they're now, people at the Justice Department, people at the White House are doing what happened when we lost court cases in the Obama administration. They're looking at all of their options and trying to figure out which has the best chances of success with the least amount of pain for the administration. Like I said, they just don't have any really great options.
So Nordstrom department store has felt the ire of Donald Trump on Twitter this week. What's the problem here? He's defending his daughter. He loves his daughter. What's the issue?
It's great. Anyone can defend their daughter, but he is the president of the United States, and he's using official government resources. One of the things he did, he retweeted the tweet about Nordstrom's from his official government account. He's using official government resources to attack a private business. Clearly inappropriate. What Kellyanne Conway did, totally inappropriate, and actually for her a violation of ethics laws. We have this strange quirk where the president himself is exempt from those conflict of interest rules, but it was clearly out of line for her, and I actually think that we ought to hold the president to the same standard as everyone else, and out of line for him too.
When you've got key figures like Kellyanne Conway doing something like that and repeating it, this isn't something she just said once, doesn't it suggest that, they should know better, right? Is this a sort of, the inexperience, the lack of political experience, is that ultimately going to cause them a lot of problems?
It's going to, and it is. The problem, though, is that Donald Trump has shown, he showed throughout the campaign, he didn't really respect the long-time Democratic traditions and norms. He didn't release his tax returns. He's refused to divest all of his holdings, which other presidents have done. So he's kind of set this standard that the rules don't apply to him. And so then you're not surprised when people like Kellyanne Conway think, well, the rules don't apply to me either. But they're going to find quickly that for people inside the government, actual staff members, the rules do apply, and a lot of them are going to get in trouble if they violate them.
Matthew Miller, thank you very much for joining us tonight. So you're watching Sky News. Coming up, another look at the morning's papers in our press preview.